the signal that should not exist. The Convergence Assembly had stood for 3 million years, a parliament of stars where 10,000 species gathered beneath the crystalline spires of Station Meridian. Here, in the heart of the galaxy, civilizations that had mastered quantum fold travel and planetary engineering debated the fundamental questions of existence. They were the ancient ones, the enlightened, the architects of order in a chaotic universe. They had cataloged every sentient species, mapped every habitable world, and established laws that governed the very fabric of space-time itself. Nothing surprised them anymore. Nothing unsettled their vast collective knowledge. Until the day the humans appeared. It began as a whisper in the void, a mathematical impossibility that rippled through the Assembly's quantum detection network like a stone thrown into still water. The signal originated from a backwater star system in the Orion Spur, a region so unremarkable that most species had never bothered to fully survey it. The third planet from its yellow sun had been noted centuries ago as harboring primitive life, nothing more than biological curiosities bound to their singular world by gravity and their own technological limitations. The monitoring probes had detected radio waves, crude chemical propulsion, and the kind of tribal conflicts that typically preceded either extinction or enlightenment. Standard developmental trajectory. Expected timeline for possible emergence into galactic society, 12,000 years, give or take a millennium. But the signal that now flooded every quantum receiver across known space was not the tentative greeting of a species taking its first steps into the cosmos. It was a declaration that defied every known law of physics. Ambassador Thelenar of the Vorian Collective was the first to bring the matter before the full assembly, her crystalline form refracting the eternal light of the station's core into patterns that conveyed urgency and confusion. She had served for 600 years, had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, had negotiated treaties that prevented wars across entire galactic arms. Nothing in her vast experience had prepared her for what she now presented to the gathered species. The holographic display materialized above the central dais, showing not coordinates or data streams, but something far more disturbing. A perfect quantum signature, encoded with information that should have been impossible to transmit, let alone conceive. The humans, those barely spacefaring primates from the unremarkable blue world, had somehow transmitted their consciousness itself across 300 light-years instantaneously, wrapped in a carrier wave that bypassed causality entirely. They had broken the one absolute law that every advanced civilization had spent millions of years proving unbreakable. Information could not travel faster than light without destroying the universe's fundamental structure. The assembly erupted into chaos. The Kavesh, beings of pure energy who had transcended physical form 2 million years prior, flickered with patterns that translated as impossible disbelief. The architects of Deneb, mechanical intellects who had replaced their biological progenitors eons ago, ran probability calculations that all returned the same result: 0% chance of natural development. The Whispering Ones, who communicated through gravitational waves and considered themselves the galaxy's foremost physicists, simply went silent, their massive forms becoming still as they processed the implications. This wasn't just a technological breakthrough. This was a fundamental rewriting of reality itself, achieved by a species that shouldn't even have discovered how to leave their own star system for another 1,000 years at minimum. Ambassador Thelenar watched the pandemonium with a growing sense of dread that coiled in her core like ice spreading through water. She had studied the humans from afar, had read the anthropological reports with the same casual interest one might give to any pre-spaceflight civilization. They were violent, yes, but no more so than most species at their developmental stage. They were innovative, certainly, with their art and their music and their endless questions about the universe, but they were supposed to be contained, limited, predictable. They were supposed to follow the patterns that every other species had followed since the dawn of galactic civilization. The message itself was simple,
almost innocent in its brevity, which made it all the more terrifying. It had been decoded by the architects within moments of its arrival, translated through quantum linguistic matrices that could interpret any form of communication. The words appeared in every language simultaneously, hovering in the minds of every sentient being within the assembly's reach. Hello? We are humanity. We have been watching the stars for a very long time, listening to your silence and wondering if we were alone. We are not waiting anymore. We are coming to meet you. Not with ships that crawl between the stars, but with the one thing you never expected us to understand. We are coming through the spaces between spaces, through the quantum foam itself. Because we asked a simple question that apparently no one else thought to ask. Why should distance matter if everything is already connected? We will arrive soon. We hope you will be ready to talk. We have so many questions. The silence that followed was absolute, a void deeper than the space between galaxies. 10,000 species, collective knowledge spanning millions of years, stood frozen in the realization that they had fundamentally misunderstood something crucial about the universe they thought they had mastered. The humans hadn't just broken a law of physics. They had revealed that the law itself might have been incomplete all along. That the ancient species had simply accepted limitations that a younger, hungrier, more audacious civilization had refused to acknowledge. And now they were coming, not as supplicants seeking to join the galactic community, but as equals who had found their own path through the darkness. Ambassador Thelenar looked out across the assembly and felt something she hadn't experienced in centuries. Genuine fear, mixed with a terrible, exhilarating curiosity about what would happen when the humans finally arrived.
The arrival that bent reality. The humans emerged from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously, a phenomenon that would later be described by the Whispering Ones as a localized unwinding of probability itself. Station Meridian sensors, instruments capable of detecting a single atom's displacement across light years, registered nothing until the moment of arrival. And then suddenly, there were 3 vessels hovering in the designated neutral zone, as if they had simply decided to exist in that particular moment and location. They were not the crude metal cylinders that the assembly's projections had predicted, nor were they the elegant organic constructs that more advanced species favored. The human ships were something else entirely, structures that seemed to shift and shimmer at their edges, as though they existed partially in dimensions that normal space couldn't quite contain. They were beautiful in a way that defied conventional aesthetics, like watching mathematics become poetry, like seeing sound translated into light. The largest vessel, which the humans would later identify as the Prometheus Initiative, measured barely 300 meters in length, laughably small compared to the kilometer-long dreadnoughts of the Vorian Collective or the moon-sized world ships of the Kavesh. Yet every species watching felt an instinctive recognition that size meant nothing when dealing with beings who had apparently rewritten the rules of existence itself. Ambassador Thelenar stood in the primary receiving chamber, surrounded by representatives from 50 of the most influential species in the assembly, each chosen for their wisdom, their diplomatic experience, and their ability to remain calm in unprecedented situations. None of them felt calm now. The chamber itself was a marvel of ancient engineering, walls composed of crystallized time that allowed all present to perceive events from multiple temporal perspectives simultaneously, ensuring that misunderstandings based on different perceptions of causality could never occur. It had been designed to accommodate any form of sentient life, from beings of pure thought to creatures that experienced reality in 11 dimensions. Yet when the humans requested permission to send an envoy, even this perfect space seemed inadequate, as though something fundamental about their presence would strain the very foundations of the station. The assembly had debated for 6 hours whether to even allow physical contact, with the more paranoid factions suggesting that the humans might be weaponized anomalies sent to destabilize galactic civilization itself. In the end,
curiosity had won over caution, that ancient hunger for knowledge that had driven every species to reach for the stars in the first place. They would meet the humans face to face, and they would finally understand how this impossible thing had been accomplished. The human who materialized in the center of the chamber did not arrive through any door or transport beam, but simply stepped out of a fold in space itself, as casually as one might step through a doorway in their own home. She was remarkably unremarkable by galactic standards, bipedal, carbon-based, standing perhaps 1.7 meters tall, with skin the color of dark earth and eyes that held depths the assembly's empaths found difficult to read. She wore simple clothing that seemed serve function over ceremony, deep blue fabric that reminded Thelnara of the oceans she had seen in Earth's orbital survey data. But what struck every observer in that moment was not her appearance or her attire, but the way she carried herself, that peculiar mixture of humility and absolute confidence that came from beings who had achieved something they knew to be extraordinary, but saw no reason to boast about it. She smiled, an expression that translated across species as a gesture of peaceful intent, though something in that smile suggested she was enjoying a private joke that the rest of the galaxy had not yet understood. When she spoke, her words appeared simultaneously in every language and communication form present, translated through the same quantum linguistic technology that had decoded their original message, proof that the humans had already mastered systems it took most species millennia to even comprehend. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that seemed almost out of place in the sterile perfection of the assembly chamber. "My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I represent the Unified Earth Coalition. I understand that our arrival has caused some concern, and I want to address that directly before we discuss anything else. We did not come here to challenge your authority or to disrupt the order you have established. We came because we discovered something remarkable, something we believe changes everything we thought we knew about the universe, and we wanted to share it with beings who might appreciate the implications. You see, we spent centuries convinced that we were alone, staring out at the stars and hearing only silence. We built our telescopes bigger and bigger, listened harder and harder, and found nothing. No signals, no evidence of other civilizations, just emptiness that made us question whether consciousness itself was some cosmic accident that had occurred exactly once. It was maddening, honestly, and it drove us to ask increasingly desperate questions about why the universe would be so vast and yet so empty. And then one of our researchers, a woman named Dr. Amara Okonkwo, who was studying quantum entanglement for completely unrelated reasons, asked a question that seemed absurd on its surface. If particles can be connected across any distance instantly, affecting each other regardless of space between them, why can't information be connected the same way? Why can't consciousness itself be connected? The assembly stirred, thousands of beings processing this statement through their various cognitive frameworks, and Thelnara felt her crystalline structure resonate with something that felt uncomfortably like embarrassment. Of course, quantum entanglement exists. Every species knows that, had known it for millions of years. It's a fundamental property of the universe, particles that remain connected regardless of separation, affecting each other in ways that seem to violate causality, but didn't because no information could actually be transmitted through the connection. That was the key limitation, the reason it remained a curiosity rather than a communication method. You couldn't control what state a particle would be in when observed, couldn't use the connection to send messages, couldn't exploit the phenomenon for anything practical. It was a cosmic coincidence, nothing more. The humans apparently thought otherwise. Dr. Okonkwo realized that we were asking the wrong question, Sarah continued, and now her smile grew wider, that expression transforming into something that conveyed the pure joy of discovery that transcended species boundaries. We weren't trying to transmit information through entangled particles. We were trying to become the entangled particles ourselves. We spent the next 40 years developing what we call quantum consciousness mapping, a process that allows us to entangle our neural patterns with corresponding quantum fields across space. We're not sending messages faster than light, we're not breaking causality, we're simply acknowledging that in a very real quantum sense, we were never actually separate from the rest of the universe to begin with. Distance is an illusion of classical physics, a macroscopic approximation that breaks down when you really examine what it means to exist. Our ships don't travel through space, Ambassador Thelnara, they simply choose to exist somewhere else. And reality accommodates them because at the quantum level, everywhere is already here. The implications crash through the assembly like a wave of compressed realization. And in that moment, 10,000 species understood that they had spent millions of years building a civilization on foundations that were far more fragile than they had ever imagined. That these young humans from their unremarkable world had seen past limitations that ancient minds had simply accepted as immutable truth.
The question that changed everything. The silence that followed Sarah Chen's explanation stretched across the chamber like a living thing, heavy with the weight of civilizations reconsidering their entire understanding of existence. Thelnara watched as the representatives around her processed what they had just heard, saw the architect's quantum processors cycling through calculations at speeds that would normally be reserved for predicting stellar collapse. Observed the Whispering One's massive forms trembling as they attempted to reconcile millions of years of accepted physics with this new paradigm. The Kavesh, those beings of pure energy who had transcended flesh so long ago that they barely remembered what it meant to be bound by matter, flickered with patterns that translated as something close to existential confusion. They had assumed their form was the ultimate evolution, the final state that all sufficiently advanced consciousness would eventually achieve. Yet here stood this human woman, still bound to her biological form, casually explaining that she had achieved something they had never even conceived as possible. It was humbling in a way that species who had ruled the galaxy for epochs were fundamentally unprepared to experience. But it was Elder Kothmar of the Sentinel Accord who finally broke the silence, his ancient voice resonating through the chamber with the kind of authority that came from having witnessed the birth and death of entire civilizations across his 5,000-year lifespan. He was one of the oldest beings in active assembly service, a creature whose species had evolved on a world orbiting a red dwarf star so old that it had watched the galaxy's spiral arms complete dozens of rotations. His kind measured time in geological epochs, made decisions with considerations that spanned millennia, and approached every situation with the kind of patience that came from knowing that almost nothing in the universe truly required urgency. When he spoke, even the most aggressive species fell silent out of respect for the sheer depth of experience his words carried. "Dr. Chen," he said, and his tone carried something that Thelnara had never heard from him before, something that sounded almost like wonder mixed with concern. "You say that your species discovered this capability 40 years ago. By our understanding of your planet's rotational period, that places your breakthrough at approximately Earth year 1985 by your calendar, correct? That means your species achieved this impossible thing when you had barely left your own planet's surface, when you still relied on chemical combustion for propulsion, when your global civilization was divided into competing factions that seemed perpetually on the brink of self-annihilation. How is that possible? How did a species that had not even unified itself, that was still struggling with basic resource distribution and primitive territorial conflicts, somehow leapfrog over developmental stages that took other civilizations millions of years to achieve? What are you?" Sarah's expression shifted then, the playful confidence giving way to something deeper, something that spoke to the complex reality of what it meant to be human in a universe that had never quite made sense to her species. She looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives, at beings who had mastered technologies that humans could barely imagine, who had built civilizations that spanned star systems and existed in harmony for longer than humanity had existed as a species. When she spoke again, her voice carried a quality that made even the most ancient beings lean forward to listen.
a timbre that conveyed both humility and an unshakable certainty about something fundamental. "We are survivors," she said simply, and those three words seemed to contain entire histories of struggle and triumph. Elder Kothmar, you're absolutely right that we discovered quantum consciousness mapping while our world was still fractured and struggling. In fact, I would argue that we discovered it precisely because we were fractured and struggling. You see, every species in this assembly that we've studied in the past few weeks, since we learned of your existence, seems to have followed a similar developmental path. You achieved a certain level of technological sophistication. You unified your worlds. You expanded carefully and methodically into space. You joined the galactic community and contributed your knowledge to the collective whole. It's beautiful, really, the way you've built this civilization together. But there's something that none of you seem to have experienced, something that shaped humanity in ways that I don't think you can fully understand unless you've lived through it. We grew up alone. She began to pace as she spoke, her movements fluid and natural in the chamber's adjusted gravity, and Fulnara noticed that the human's body language conveyed emotional states in ways that were remarkably easy to read, despite the biological differences. For thousands of years, we looked up at the night sky and asked if anyone else was out there. We built religions around the question, philosophies, entire systems of thought dedicated to understanding our place in the cosmos. We searched desperately for any sign that we weren't alone in an infinite universe, that consciousness and thought and wonder weren't some cosmic accident that had happened exactly once. And we found nothing. No signals, no visitors, no evidence whatsoever that intelligence existed anywhere except on our one small world orbiting our one unremarkable star. Do you understand what that does to a species? The existential loneliness of it. We were forced to confront the possibility that we might be the only beings in the entire universe capable of asking questions about the universe itself. It was terrifying and exhilarating, and it made us hungry in ways that species who grew up knowing about galactic civilization simply never needed to be. We couldn't rely on ancient knowledge passed down from older species. We couldn't follow established paths to the stars. We had to figure out everything ourselves from first principles, with nothing but our own curiosity and stubbornness to guide us. And yes, we made mistakes, terrible mistakes, that nearly destroyed us multiple times. But we survived. And more than that, we learned to ask questions that no one else thought to ask because we had no one to tell us which questions were acceptable and which were impossible. The assembly listened, and Fulnara felt something shifting in the chamber's atmosphere, a subtle change in how the gathered species were perceiving these humans who had arrived so impossibly. Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, carrying a passion that was infectious even across species barriers. Dr. Okonkwo asked her impossible question not because she was smarter than your physicists, Elder Kothmar, but because she was desperate. She had spent her entire childhood staring at stars she was told she would never reach in her lifetime, distances that seemed insurmountable given our primitive technology. She refused to accept that limitation. She refused to believe that the universe would be cruel enough to fill itself with wonders and then place them forever beyond our reach. So she asked a question that your species probably considered and dismissed millions of years ago. And she kept asking it, kept pursuing it, kept experimenting even when every rational analysis said it was impossible. And she succeeded because she came from a species that had learned, through countless generations of isolation and struggle, that impossible just meant no one had figured it out yet. That's what humans are, Elder. We're the species that grew up in the dark, convinced we were alone, and we turned that loneliness into the most powerful force in the universe, the absolute refusal to accept that anything is truly impossible. The assembly erupted then, not with chaos this time, but with a different kind of energy. A wave of recognition that spread through the assembly as species after species began to understand what humanity represented. They were not a threat to galactic civilization, not weapons or anomalies or harbingers of destruction. They were something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that had developed in complete isolation, without the guidance or limitations imposed by older civilizations, free to pursue knowledge in directions that the established order had long ago deemed fruitless. They were innovation incarnate, evolution unbound by precedent, the embodiment of what happened when curiosity met desperation and refused to surrender. And now they were here, offering to share their discoveries, to collaborate rather than conquer, to add their perspective to a civilization that had, perhaps, grown too comfortable in its ancient wisdom. Thulnara felt her crystalline form resonating with an emotion she couldn't quite name, something between excitement and trepidation, the feeling of standing at the edge of a vast, unknown territory that promised wonders and dangers in equal measure. Sarah Chen stood at the center of the chamber, surrounded by beings who had existed for eons, and she smiled that uniquely human smile once more. "We didn't come here to prove we're special, Ambassador Thulnara," she said, looking directly at the Vorian representative. "We came because we've been alone for so long, and we're tired of the silence. We came because we finally found out that we're not the only ones asking questions about the universe, and that makes us happier than you can possibly imagine. We came because we want to learn from you, to understand how you've built this incredible civilization, to share what we've discovered, and see what we can build together. We're not asking to lead, not demanding recognition or status. We're just asking to be part of the conversation, to add our voice to the symphony of species that fill this galaxy with thought and wonder and endless curiosity. We're asking if there's room in your assembly for one more species, one more perspective, one more way of looking at the universe that might, just might, help all of us understand it a little bit better. What do you say? Are we welcome here?" And in that moment, as 10,000 species considered the question, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen when humanity finally joined the conversation that had been going on for millions of years, ready to change everything simply by being exactly what they had always been. Impossible, stubborn, brilliant, and absolutely, undeniably human.